Sometimes the person you say for the right reason becomes the one who changes your life forever. I never imagined those words would become my story. It was almost 11:30 p.m. when I flipped the sign on the front door of Bennett Family Clinic from open to closed. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee, the familiar scent that had followed me through 5 years of working late nights in a neighborhood where people waited until pain became unbearable before asking for help. My feet ached inside my worn sneakers, and the chart in my hands blurred as exhaustion settled behind my eyes. All I wanted was a hot shower, 6 hours of sleep if I was lucky, and enough energy to do it all again tomorrow. Outside, cold rain tapped softly against the windows, turning the empty street into a shimmering ribbon of reflections beneath the amber glow of streetlights. I reached for the light switch when headlights suddenly swept across the reception desk. A black SUV rolled to an unsteady stop in front of the clinic. The engine remained running, but no one stepped out. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. A tall man climbed out slowly, one hand pressed against his side beneath a charcoal overcoat. Even through the rain, I noticed how carefully he moved, as if every step demanded concentration. He wasn't staggering, but he carried himself like someone determined not to fall. His dark hair clung to his forehead, rain tracing quiet lines across a face that looked carved from stone. Expensive clothes, polished shoes, a silver watch that caught the streetlight for just a heartbeat. Everything about him suggested wealth and control, yet there was something in his eyes that didn't belong to either. He pushed open the clinic door without asking permission. The tiny bell above it chimed softly. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "We're closed." He looked at me, calm despite the strain visible in his expression. "I won't take long." His voice was low, steady, carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He rested one gloved hand on the reception counter before quietly adding, "I need a doctor." Every instinct warned me to call 911 or tell him to go to the nearest emergency room. Instead, I saw something else beneath the tailored coat and composed expression. I saw a man trying very hard not to collapse. Compassion had always been my greatest strength. Sometimes it was also my greatest weakness. I locked the front door behind him, guided him into the examination room, and reached for my medical kit. As I carefully examined the injury, he never complained once. He answered only the questions that mattered and remained silent through everything else. His eyes studied every movement I made, not with suspicion but with quiet curiosity, as though kindness was something he hadn't encountered in a very long time. When I finished cleaning and bandaging the wound, relief softened the tension in his shoulders. He reached into his coat, removed a thick envelope, and placed it on the counter. I gently pushed it back toward him. "Just take care of yourself," I said. "That's enough." For the first time that night, the corner of his mouth lifted into the faintest smile. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Without another word, he walked back into the rain and vanished into the darkness. I watched the empty street for several seconds before locking up again, convincing myself I would never see that mysterious stranger again. I couldn't have been more wrong. Sleep never really came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stranger standing beneath the clinic lights, rain dripping from the edge of his coat while he watched me with those strangely calm green eyes. By morning, I convinced myself I had imagined the intensity of the encounter. New York had a way of throwing unusual people into your path, and doctors learned quickly not to ask questions they did not need answered. I arrived at the clinic before 7, unlocked the front door, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and settled into another ordinary day. Parents brought children with stubborn fevers. Construction workers came in with sore backs. An elderly couple argued playfully over who had forgotten their blood pressure medication. The familiar rhythm slowly pushed the mysterious visitor into the background of my thoughts until just after noon, when every television inside the waiting room interrupted regular programming with breaking news. A reporter stood outside a luxury hotel surrounded by flashing cameras while bold letters stretched across the bottom of the screen. "Business leader survives assassination attempt." The anchor explained that Adrian Moretti, a powerful real estate investor and philanthropist known throughout the city, had escaped a carefully planned attack the previous evening. Officials refused to release additional details, but rumors spread quickly across every news station. They showed a photograph, and the coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. It was him. The same sharp jaw. The same composed expression. The same eyes that had watched me work without saying more than necessary. My heartbeat became painfully loud inside my ears. A patient asked if I was feeling all right, and I forced a smile before quietly turning the television off. The rest of the afternoon drifted by in a haze. Every headline on my phone repeated his name. Some articles praised his charitable foundation. Others hinted that his influence reached far beyond boardrooms and business meetings. None of them explained why someone with endless resources had walked into a neighborhood clinic instead of a private hospital. None of them explained why he had trusted a complete stranger. I kept replaying our conversation, searching for clues I had somehow missed. By 6 o'clock, the waiting room was empty again. I locked the medicine cabinet, gathered my notes, and reached for my coat when a black luxury sedan rolled silently to the curb outside. Its polished surface reflected the fading sunset like dark glass. Two men in tailored suits stepped out with measured confidence, neither appearing rushed nor threatening. One of them adjusted his tie before opening the clinic door. He offered a polite smile that somehow made me even more nervous. "Miss Bennett," he said in a calm voice, "Mr. Moretti would like to thank you personally. We have been looking for you all day." SUA. For a moment, I simply stared at the two men standing inside my clinic, wondering if I had somehow stepped into someone else's life. They looked nothing like the patients who usually walk through my door. Their dark tailored suits fit perfectly, their polished shoes barely made a sound across the floor, and both carried themselves with the quiet confidence of men who never expected to hear the word no. Yet neither of them seemed threatening. They waited patiently, allowing me to decide my next move. "I appreciate the invitation," I finally said, "but I really do not think that is necessary. Mr. Moretti already thanked me by walking out of here alive." The older man smiled politely. "Miss Bennett, our employer rarely asks twice. However, he also instructed us to make one thing perfectly clear. You are free to decline." That answer surprised me more than anything else. If the stories surrounding Adrian Moretti were even half true, I expected demands, not choices. I folded my arms, trying to quiet the nervous rhythm of my heartbeat. "Then tell him I wish him a full recovery." The younger man exchanged a brief glance with his partner before speaking. "There is something Mr. Moretti believes belongs to you." He reached into his jacket and placed a small velvet box on the reception counter. Inside rested the silver watch I had noticed the previous evening while changing his bandage. I immediately remembered removing it so I could clean his wrist properly before setting it beside the examination table. In all the confusion, neither of us had remembered it. I slid the box back toward him. "You can return it to him." He gently pushed it back again. "He specifically asked that you deliver it yourself." Before I could answer, both men stepped outside, leaving a simple white business card beside the box. There was no address, no company logo, only a phone number embossed in black and a single sentence beneath it. "When you are ready." I watched their sedan disappear around the corner before locking the clinic for the second time that day. During the drive home, I kept telling myself to throw the card away. People like Adrian Moretti belonged on television screens and newspaper headlines, not inside the ordinary routine of my life. Still, when I reached my apartment, I placed the velvet box inside my kitchen drawer instead of forgetting about it. Around 9 that evening, my phone vibrated with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Curiosity won. I answered quietly. A familiar voice greeted me from the other end of the line. Calm, measured, unmistakable. "Miss Bennett," Adrian said, "thank you for keeping my watch safe. I was hoping I could thank you properly this time." His voice carried none of the urgency from the night we first met. It was calm, almost warm, the kind of voice that made every word sound carefully chosen. I looked at the phone for a second before answering. "You really did not have to call," I said quietly. "I was going to return your watch eventually." A brief silence followed, and then I heard the faintest hint of amusement. "I do not think eventually is a medical term, Dr. Bennett." I smiled despite myself. "It is Claire. Then you may call me Adrian." Hearing his first name somehow made him sound less like the man from the headlines and more like the exhausted stranger who had walked into my clinic looking for help. "I would like to invite you to dinner," he continued. "Nothing formal. I simply owe you my thanks." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring out the apartment window at the city lights stretching toward the horizon. "I appreciate the offer, but I think it is better if we leave things the way they are." Another pause. I expected persuasion. Instead, He surprised me again. May I ask why? The question was genuine, without frustration or pride. Because our worlds are different, I answered honestly. I treat patients. You lead a life that belongs on the evening news. That is enough distance for me. I thought he might end the call there. Instead, he spoke so softly that I almost missed his words. Do you know what I remember most about last night? I closed my eyes. No, you never asked who I was. His answer settled over me with unexpected weight. Most people, he explained, recognized influence before humanity. They saw titles, wealth, reputation, expectations. I had simply seen someone who needed medical care. I did not know how to respond because he was right. In that examination room, none of those things had mattered. I still have patients tomorrow, I finally said, trying to steer the conversation back toward ordinary life. Then I will not keep you. His voice remained composed. But there is one favor I hope you will consider. What is it? Allow me 10 minutes. Return my watch in person. If, after 10 minutes, you never wish to see me again, I will respect your decision completely. The request sounded so reasonable that refusing suddenly felt almost impolite. Before I realized it, I heard myself asking, where? He gave me the address of a quiet Italian restaurant overlooking the Hudson River. Not a mansion, not an office tower, just a place where two strangers could have dinner. After the call ended, I stood alone in my apartment with the phone still in my hand. Every instinct told me to cancel before morning. Yet another part of me kept remembering the look in Adrian's eyes the night I treated him. It was not fear. It was loneliness. And for reasons I could not explain, that memory refused to let me walk away. The next evening, I almost turned my car around 3 different times before reaching the restaurant. Every practical part of me insisted this was a mistake. I had spent years building a quiet life centered on patience, long shifts, and simple routines. Adrian Moretti represented everything unpredictable, and yet curiosity kept my hands steady on the steering wheel. The restaurant overlooked the Hudson River, where the fading sunlight painted the water in shades of gold and deep blue. It was elegant without feeling extravagant, the kind of place where conversations mattered more than appearances. A hostess greeted me by name before leading me to a quiet table near the windows. Adrian was already there. He stood as I approached, dressed in a navy suit without a tie, looking more like an accomplished businessman than the mysterious stranger who had walked into my clinic through the rain. His expression softened into a genuine smile. Thank you for coming, Claire. I placed the velvet box on the table between us. I promised I would return this. He looked at the watch for only a second before sliding it aside. I knew you would. We ordered dinner, and for the first few minutes our conversation stayed comfortably ordinary. He asked why I had chosen medicine. I told him about my mother, who had spent 30 years as a nurse and taught me that kindness could be as important as any prescription. He listened without interrupting, giving every answer my full attention as though nothing else in the city existed. When he spoke about his own childhood, he remained careful with details, describing hard work, responsibility, and the importance of protecting the people who depended on him. There were obvious gaps in his story, but I did not press him. Everyone carried chapters they were not ready to share. Halfway through dinner, the waiter quietly placed the check beside Adrian. Before he could reach for it, I picked it up. Absolutely not, I said with a small smile. You invited me because you wanted to thank me. That does not mean I stopped being capable of paying for my own meal. He looked genuinely surprised before leaning back in his chair. Do you argue with everyone this confidently? Only people who assume generosity belongs to one side of the table. For a brief moment he laughed, not politely, but honestly. It transformed his entire face, making him appear years younger. Nearby diners glanced over, perhaps recognizing him, but Adrian ignored every curious look. His attention never left me. As we stepped outside after dinner, a cool breeze drifted in from the river. The city lights reflected across the water like scattered stars. Adrian stopped beside the sidewalk and looked at me with quiet sincerity. Claire, may I ask you one more question? I nodded. His voice became softer than I had ever heard it. Why do I feel like tonight is the first conversation I have had in years where nobody wanted something from me? His question stayed with me long after the evening breeze faded into the background. I looked across the river before answering because the truth deserved more than a hurried response. Maybe because I never met Adrian Moretti until a rainy night inside my clinic. I said, I met a patient who needed help. Everything else came later. He lowered his eyes for a moment, as if those words carried more weight than I intended. Most people introduce themselves by telling me what they expect from me, he admitted. You introduced yourself by asking whether I was in pain. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The silence felt comfortable instead of awkward. It was the kind of silence shared by two people who no longer needed to impress each other. Adrian walked me to my car, without trying to shorten the distance between us or extend the evening beyond what I had agreed to. Before I opened the driver's door, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and handed me a simple white envelope. Please read this after you get home, he said. There is no obligation attached to it. I accepted it with a cautious smile. You really enjoy making people curious. A quiet laugh escaped him. Only one person, apparently. During the drive home, I resisted opening the envelope, reminding myself that patience was part of good judgment. Once inside my apartment, I placed my keys on the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of water, and finally unfolded the letter. It was not a contract, a check, or an invitation to another expensive dinner. Instead, it was a proposal written in surprisingly direct language. Adrian explained that his charitable foundation operated several community health programs across New York, including free clinics in neighborhoods where medical care was difficult to access. He wanted me to visit one of them, not as an employee, but simply as a physician whose opinion he trusted. If I believed improvements were needed, he promised to fund them without asking for recognition. I read the letter twice, uncertain whether to believe it. The headlines had painted one picture of Adrian. The man I had shared dinner with seemed to be someone else entirely. Early the next morning, I arrived at the clinic expecting another routine day, but I immediately noticed fresh flowers sitting on the reception desk. There was no expensive arrangement, no extravagant display, only a small bouquet of white lilies with a handwritten card tucked between the stems. The message contained a single sentence. Thank you for reminding me that kindness does not always come with conditions. I smiled before placing the card inside my desk drawer, unaware that someone standing across the street had quietly noticed both the flowers and the name written beneath the message. For the rest of the week, life seemed almost ordinary again, but I began noticing small details that refused to fit into an ordinary routine. A black sedan appeared across the street every morning just after I unlocked the clinic. It never blocked traffic, never drew attention, and always disappeared before sunset. At first I assumed it belonged to a neighbor, but after the fourth day, I realized it was too consistent to be a coincidence. Even stranger, whenever I left work after dark, someone always seemed to be walking a few steps behind me, never close enough to speak, never far enough to disappear completely. I tried convincing myself that I was imagining things until Saturday afternoon when I visited one of the community clinics Adrian had mentioned in his letter. The building was older than I expected, but every examination room was clean, fully supplied, and filled with volunteers who greeted every patient with genuine kindness. Families who could never have afforded regular medical care were receiving treatment without worrying about bills. A little girl handed me a drawing she had made while waiting for her father to finish his appointment. Across the top she had written, "Thank you for helping people smile again." I folded the picture carefully and slipped it into my bag. On the drive home, I could not stop thinking about the difference between the stories the news repeated and the quiet reality I had just witnessed. That evening my phone rang. Adrian sounded relieved the moment I answered. "Did you enjoy your visit?" he asked. "I did," I admitted. "You never mentioned how many people those clinics actually help." He laughed softly. "Because I hoped you would judge them with your own eyes instead of mine." Before I could respond, his tone became more serious. "Claire, I need to ask you something unusual." My heartbeat quickened. "What is it? Have you noticed anyone following you?" I hesitated. "Maybe. I thought I was imagining it." There was a brief silence before he spoke again. "You were not imagining it." I stopped walking and tightened my grip on my phone. "What does that mean?" "It means someone else has started asking questions about the doctor who treated me that night." The warmth that had filled our conversation only moments earlier vanished, replaced by a quiet concern I had never heard in his voice before. "I never wanted my world to reach yours," he said. "But now that it has, I intend to make sure nothing interrupts the life you worked so hard to build." As I looked through my apartment window toward the street below, I noticed the familiar black sedan parked beneath the glowing street lamp, and for the first time I understood it had never been there to watch me. It had been there to protect me. After that phone call, I stopped trying to convince myself that everything would simply return to normal. Life still looked the same from the outside. Patients filled the waiting room. Children laughed as they picked stickers from the front desk. Elderly couples thanked me for listening longer than most doctors had time to. Yet beneath those familiar moments, I sensed an invisible current moving quietly around me. The black sedan remained nearby every morning, never intrusive, always distant enough to respect my space. It no longer frightened me. It reminded me that somewhere in the city, someone had decided my safety mattered. A few days later, I accepted Adrian's invitation to visit another clinic supported by his foundation. This one stood in a neighborhood that had struggled for years with limited access to healthcare. The building itself was modest, but every room carried the warmth of people who genuinely cared. Volunteer physicians greeted patients by name. Local families shared meals in the community center next door. Children filled the small courtyard with laughter while waiting for appointments. None of it resembled the stories that surrounded Adrian's public image. As we walked through the hallway together, staff members thanked him with quiet respect instead of fear. He remembered birthdays. He asked about recovering patients. He stopped to congratulate a young nursing student who had just passed her licensing exam. There were no cameras, no reporters, no speeches, just simple acts of kindness repeated so often they had become part of who he was. I looked at him differently that afternoon. Why does nobody know about any of this? I asked. Adrian smiled faintly as he watched a little boy race across the courtyard holding a bright red balloon. Because people are free to believe whatever story they prefer, he answered. Recognition has never healed a patient. Good people have. His words stayed with me as we continued walking. Before leaving, an elderly woman approached us carrying a homemade apple pie wrapped carefully in a towel. She handed it directly to Adrian. "You helped keep this clinic open," she said with grateful eyes. "My husband is still here because of this place." Adrian accepted the pie with genuine humility and thanked her as though she had given him something priceless. During the drive back into Manhattan, neither of us spoke very much. We did not need to. For the first time since meeting him, I realized I was no longer comparing the man beside me with the headlines I had once believed. I was simply seeing Adrian for who he truly was. As the skyline appeared in the distance, he glanced toward me before quietly saying, "Claire, there is something about my life that you still do not know, and before someone else tells you their version of the truth, I think it is finally time you hear mine." The city lights drifted past the windows as Adrian kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the steering wheel. I waited without speaking because I had learned that silence often carried more honesty than hurried explanations. After several minutes, he finally pulled into a quiet overlook above the Hudson River and turned off the engine. The skyline shimmered across the water, peaceful and distant, as though the noise of the city could not reach us there. Adrian took a slow breath before looking at me. "Everything people say about me is not completely wrong," he admitted. "I have spent years making difficult decisions so the people who depend on me could live without fear. I accepted responsibilities that I never wanted because there was nobody else left to carry them." He paused, searching my face for judgment. "But there is one thing the headlines never mention. Every hospital we support, every scholarship we fund, every clinic that stays open exists because I promised myself that no child would lose a parent simply because help arrived too late." I listened quietly as he explained that years earlier he had watched someone he loved struggle to receive timely medical care. That experience had shaped every charitable project he built afterward, even if the public never connected his name to those efforts. When he finished, I realized I had not interrupted him once. "You expected me to walk away?" I said softly. He nodded with a tired smile. "Most people eventually do." I looked toward the river before answering. "I cannot pretend to understand every part of your life, Adrian. But I do understand what it means to spend your days trying to protect people you may never meet again. That is what doctors do." His expression changed in a way I had never seen before. The constant weight behind his eyes seemed lighter, replaced by something quieter and infinitely more hopeful. He reached into the center console and removed the little drawing the child from the community clinic had given me days earlier. Somehow he had carefully preserved it after I accidentally left it in his car. He handed it back with a gentle smile. "You should keep this," he said. "It belongs to the person who earned it." I accepted the folded paper and laughed softly when I saw the colorful words again. "Thank you for helping people smile again." At that moment, I understood something simple yet profound. The night I treated a stranger, I believed I was saving one patient. In truth, two lives had quietly changed direction. As we stood beside the river beneath the glow of the city skyline, Adrian extended his hand without saying another word. I looked into his eyes, saw not power or wealth but sincerity, and placed my hand in his. Sometimes destiny does not arrive with grand promises. Sometimes it begins with a small act of kindness offered to a stranger and grows into the courage to believe that even the darkest paths can still lead people home.